We are going to discuss about judicial review, judicial activism and judicial overreach. Within judicial activism, we'll also discuss about PILs. Okay, so let us first begin with judicial review. What is the definition of judicial review and what are the various dimensions to judicial review? Okay, so what is the definition of judicial review?
Reviewing the judgment, reviewing the judgment, even the court.
Okay, reviewing what? What does the court review? Right? On what basis? What are the grounds on which it reviews? Constitutionality. Right. So please write down the definition of judicial review. It is the power of courts. It is the power of courts to consider the constitutionality. Power of courts to consider the constitutionality of the actions of legislature and executive, and declare them unconstitutional or null and void, unconstitutional or null and void if they violate or are inconsistent, if they violate or are inconsistent with the Constitution. Okay, and the articles which provide for judicial review in the Constitution are Article 13, Article 32 and Article 226. These are the articles from which we derive the judicial review power of Supreme Court and High Courts. Article 13, 32 and 226 are the articles from which we derive the judicial review power of Supreme Court and High Courts. In the Constitution, it is not explicitly mentioned that Supreme Court has judicial review power or High Court has judicial review power. Such explicit mention is not provided for in the Constitution. We derive this power from Article 13, 32 and 226. Okay, then you write about dimensions. What are the various dimensions to judicial review? First dimension is review of legislative actions on the grounds of violation of Constitution and various principles implicit in the Constitution. The Constitution has certain implicit principles such as principle of natural justice, principle of reasonableness, arbitrariness, irrationality. Examples are principle of natural justice, reasonableness, so the court will first see if the legislative action, that is a law passed by parliament or state legislature, is it violating any provision in the constitution which is explicitly mentioned? Is it violating any provision in the constitution which is explicitly mentioned? That is, some provision is written down in the constitution and the law passed by parliament or state legislature violates that particular provision. Okay, so this is the first part. The second part is there any violation of principles which are implicit in the constitution? For example, whenever state takes away your fundamental rights, it is implicit in the constitution that the restrictions which the state imposes on your fundamental rights must be reasonable restrictions. Right? So this is principle of reasonableness. There is also principle of natural justice which is implied in the concept of rule of law. That is, everyone must be able to defend themselves against the crime which they are alleged to have committed. Right? For example, you have committed a murder or you have not committed a murder, but an allegation was leveled against you. You should be able to defend yourself in the court of law. Right? Everyone should have access to natural justice. There are some principles of natural justice. You should be told on what basis you are being arrested. You should be able to defend yourself in the court of law. Only when your crime is proved beyond doubt, only then you should be given punishment. Okay? So these principles of natural justice are implied in the constitution. Right? Principle of arbitrariness, that is, the actions of the state should not be arbitrary. That is, if two individuals are placed in similar circumstances, you cannot give more privileges to someone and less privileges to someone. Both of you are citizens of this country, you should be treated in an equal manner. The actions of the state cannot be arbitrary. If the government is distributing white ration cards or ration cards to all the citizens who are below poverty line, if you are a person who is below poverty line, the state cannot deny a ration card to you. The criteria which the state has prescribed must be applicable to all those who are below poverty line equally. Right? If two individuals are below poverty line, you cannot say that I will give ration card to you, I will not give ration card to you. That is arbitrariness. Right? Example is your Citizenship Amendments Act, Citizenship Amendment Act. If you are a person who is part of a community which is facing religious persecution in neighboring countries, all those who are facing religious persecution must be given citizenship. Right? You cannot say that I will only give it to Hindus or Buddhists, I will not give it to Muslims. If you are saying that you are going to give citizenship to people who are facing religious persecution in our neighboring countries. Myanmar is also a neighboring country. Rohingyas are facing religious persecution in Myanmar. They are Muslims. You cannot say that I will give it to Hindu minorities in Pakistan, but I will not give it to Muslim minorities in Myanmar. That is arbitrariness. Right? So there should not be violation of these principles which are implicit in the constitution. So the legislative actions are evaluated on these criteria. Are you able to follow? Yes? Write down. This is the first dimension. Legislative actions are evaluated on the grounds of violation of constitution and principles implicit in the constitution. The next dimension of evaluation is competence. Whether this particular legislature is competent to make that law or not. Whether parliament has competence to make this law or not. Whether state legislature has competence to make this law or not. If parliament makes or wants to make a law on a matter in state list, is it allowed? Is the parliament competent to make laws on matters in state list? No, right? So this is the second criteria on which the court will evaluate. Whether the legislature has competence to make that law or not. Okay, next ground for evaluation is violation of basic structure. This is applicable to constitutional amendment acts. Constitutional amendment acts are reviewed on the grounds of violation of basic structure. Within this first point that you have written, you can also write regarding violation of fundamental rights. This is also another ground on which the court will evaluate legislative actions. Okay, next is executive actions. Executive action, what are executive actions? What is the meaning of executive actions?
Laws implementation.
What is the meaning? What is the meaning of executive actions? Very simple, no? Actions taken by the executive. Who are part of executive? Your prime minister, your ministers, chief minister, state level ministers, president, governor, all these are part of executive, right? So the actions taken by these authorities will fall under this. Even your IAS, IPS officers and all the bureaucrats in the country, executive. Now executive actions will be reviewed by the court on the following grounds. Illegality, that is the action taken is against some law which is passed by parliament or state legislature. That is illegality. The law says something, but you are implementing it in a different manner. You are violating the law passed by parliament or state legislature. Illegality, unconstitutionality, that is, it is against the provisions of the constitution. They are also evaluated on these grounds: principles implicit in the constitution, principle of reasonableness, non-arbitrariness, natural justice, rationality. procedural propriety. What is the meaning of procedural propriety? What is the meaning of procedural propriety? You can't think of anything? Procedural propriety? Procedural propriety implies that not just outcome, the process is also important. Not just outcome, the process or the procedure is also important. Think of Disha rape case in Hyderabad to understand this procedural propriety. Yes, the police have encountered some minors, they died. There was allegation that those minors have committed the crime of rape, so you have murdered them. But was there procedural fairness? Was the procedure followed? Outcome is fine, but was the procedure followed? Filing an FIR, filing a charge sheet, taking them to court, conducting a trial and proving their guilt in the court of law, was the procedure followed? No, right? So in democracies, in countries with rule of law, not just the outcome, the procedure is also considered very important. Okay, for example, lot of times you see various government servants engaging in bribery or some sort of corruption, right? And it is very difficult also to take action against them. Why? It is the flip side of following procedures. The procedures are so difficult to actually follow that you are unable to take any action against them. ARC2 lists out some 50 to 60 steps which have to be followed to suspend or to remove a government servant, right? But still we follow those procedures. Whether to pass a law in parliament, whether to pass a budget, whether to pass a decision of the government to pass an order or rule or regulation or to arrest someone, for everything procedure is very important and it has to be followed, even for spending money. Okay, this is procedural propriety, and lot of times Supreme Court has struck down the action taken against government officers for corruption because some step in the procedure was missing. Procedure was not followed, which is why the action taken against these government servants was struck down by the court. Okay, so this is also one of the grounds on which executive actions will be evaluated. Procedural propriety. Was the procedure followed? Okay. The actions of president and governors. President, governors are also subject to judicial review on various grounds. Existence of material, mala fide nature of the action. We have already discussed this. Okay, so these are various grounds for intervention into executive actions under judicial review. Next, write down the purpose. What is the purpose of judicial review? First point is to ensure supremacy of the Constitution. To ensure supremacy of the Constitution. Second is to protect constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights. To protect constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights. Third is to protect federal equilibrium. To protect federal equilibrium. Fourth is to ensure legality and fairness in administrative actions. To ensure legality and fairness in administrative actions. You understood these 4 points? They are self-explanatory. Do you want me to explain them? To ensure supremacy of the Constitution, to protect fundamental rights, to maintain federal equilibrium, and to ensure legality and fairness in administrative actions. Do you understand how these 4 points result from the discussion that we have had so far? Yes? These are the consequences. These 4 points are the consequences or the results of whatever we have discussed so far.